Good news, you're here just in time. Here's another Laneway Talks.
Good morning, Rob, and welcome to another episode of Laneway Talks, the show about anything and everything and nothing, and I suppose a lot about a lot or not. How are you?
I'm all right. It's early, isn't it?
Yeah. You got to think, buddy. You got to think.
Yeah, so, I like your original introduction when you first rang me about politics. And
yeah. The show about politics, music, society, psychiatry, psychology. And,
you got it all.
Yeah, I don't know. There's got to be some things missing in there, mate.
History, mate.
History, yes. Economics.
Yes.
Anyway, how are you? All right?
Yeah, good. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Now, today, you've got a list of drummers that we're going to discuss, or bands, so to speak, but drummers from bands. Now, I'd listened to the ones that you'd sent through, and, I kind of got my opinion. So I'm going to shoot over to you. You're running the ship today, so you're at the helm.
What I originally had for my intention for today was to talk about English and American drummers like Mick Woody Woodmansey from Bowie and Spiders from Mars, and their influence back then, Ainsley Dunbar from Zappa and Jeff Beck, Keith Moon from The Who, Cozy Powell from Rainbow, as well as Pace Bonham and Neil Peart and Bill Ward and all those guys. But then I went, why don't I go back to what my research is about, which is pub rock in Australia, because I've got a really intricate section of my thesis, which is called Breaking Down the Iconic Transnational Sound. Now, for drummers, played a big part in that. So then I changed my tack and sent you a list of different drummers. And I was looking at that list today or yesterday and the day before, pondering it, going, all right, we'll start from Adrian Redmond from the Purple Hearts, right?
I want to ask you one thing before we start there, because you just said something that twicked my little brain here. So is there a difference, you being the expert here, right? Are you suggesting there's a difference between English drummers, American drummers, and Australian drummers?
Yes, there is.
Right.
Subtle,
okay.
But there is. Okay. It's all interpretation, yeah.
Yep. Okay. Continue on.
All right. Reasons behind that, and most of my research is based in Adelaide and Melbourne, because that's where most of my experience is from.
Music capitals of Australia, my friend.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's justified by lots of people actually stating that.
Just look at the bands that have come out of those two territories, and it dominates the Australian music landscape over the last 40 to 50 years.
Well, it's interesting because in the section that I'm talking about in my book, Glenn A. Baker lists the difference between the states, and I thought that was quite fascinating, and I sort of expanded upon that by going through the bands. Brisbane in 65, we're talking about the Purple Hearts, and I went in, a drummer from the Purple Hearts was Adrian Redmond.
Yeah.
And I go into the song Long-Legged Baby, right, which was a Chuck Berry 12-bar groove, which for Australia in that time, that's where the influences were coming from. Pretty much the United States, we had a lot of exposure from the American military, and people brought that sort of music out and it extended on. And it's, it's a blues in B, and it's slightly swung. It's kind of got that, when I say swung, it's got that triplet feel as opposed to that straight eight feel.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And the Purple Hearts were sort of all about that. Wobbie's style is built around that, and we'll sort of morph into that a little bit later on. The next one was the Pink Finks from Melbourne, which is another blues swing.
Era? What are you talking about?
1965 we're talking about.
Okay.
And it's Ross Wilson.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So that's where that sort of originated from. Richard Franklin was the drummer from that. And the song was, that I will refer to today is The Backdoor Man. And once again, it's that quarter note backbeat rhythm and blues swing thing, which is a cover of a Howling Wolf song. So you're looking at influences from overseas influencing, Australian bands and Australian drummers in the 60s. The next one that I found really important, which was the sound of Sydney, all right? So you've got the sound of Queensland being the Purple Hearts, for argument's sake. The sound of Melbourne being the Pink Finks. We're talking about 1965.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about Sydney in 66, which is like a surf town. Different,
Yeah.
You've got the aggressive sort of Brisbane element. You've got Melbourne's cultural sort of element. And then you go to the surf element because of the weather.
Yeah.
In Sydney, and it's Colin McCauley from the Black Diamonds.
Oh, yeah.
who then turned into Timepiece. Now, the Black Diamonds are a significant band in my research because the singer, Glenn Christopher, I wrote a lot of music with him during the 80s and worked with him with his band Red Eye here and my band, the Glenn Christopher Band. So I was really interested in Colin's drumming.
Was that song that you sent me, was that what year was that?
1965.
I've got to say,
66. Yeah.
For 65, 66, they were at least 3 years ahead of their time with that sound and that singing.
And it was the surf punk.
Yeah.
They're labelled as a punk garage band. Now, that's coming out of Australia in 66. You've got to look at your history around the world. That's a really significant impact to make here in our country. But if you compare that, they're actually Black Diamonds and Timepiece, because they changed their name to Timepiece about 12 months after. They were really big in England, and they're the kind of the band that nobody knows about. I mean, I know about them because Glenn is a participant in my research, as are you, Vincent. And I just found it fascinating when I looked into it because I love what Colin's doing. He's just pounding the living daylights out of his drums, but he's playing all over the groove. He's got all these Buddy Rich type, jazz type snare fills and really intricate tom patterns that go with the guitar groove. And you can relate that to a Rob Hurst, like with Midnight Oil and the way the Oil started. It's the same sort of Sydney punk, aggressive drumming style, but it's not straight. It's really punctuating the rhythm guitar and those sort of grooves, which comes back once again, if you look at Lobby and the Purple Heart, Pink Finks and Black Diamonds, they're all sort of linked in that sort of Australian aggressive style as well.
Well, I tell you, my take on 60s, that 65 onwards, then into the 70s, I find, and mate, I'm an amateur compared to you, I find that 60s kind of drumming to me is quite intricate, and I find the 70s is more laid back and more simplified. Now, that's just my take, okay?
Yeah, you've got to consider that, for me, the changeover point for me in my research is 62 for a lot of reasons, but one of them was it went from rock and roll to rock, pub rock, right, in 62. Rock and roll being the Elvis 50s style, right?
Yeah.
And then that changed in 62 when it got more psychedelic with a psychedelic type of band. And that sort of leads me into Gil Matthews playing with the Levi Smith's Clefs. And if you have a listen to the song I Can Only Give You Everything, that's super psychedelic. And Gil's playing, I mean, he's legendary, as you know, especially his work with Thorpe and the myriad of bands. But that band, the Levi Smith's Clefs, had so many influential drummers in it, like Colin Butel, I think.
Butel from...
Butel from AC/DC first album.
There was... Who was the other Butel? Was there one... Was he the guy that played in Total Union, Band of Light? I think so. It was Tony Butel, I'm sure.
Tony Butel, sorry, I said Colin.
Yeah, Tony Butel played in Band of Light, which to me, for people that are listening, it is the quintessential blues Australian pub rock slide-based band of all time to come out of this country with a New Zealand singer.
Yeah, absolutely. But see, they're the links we're talking about, I think, in Australian history, and the Australian sound are really, really important. Because, as I said, Gil, being legendary as a drummer and his style, I mean, he was very Buddy Rich influenced. I think he had something to do with winning the Buddy Rich scholarships in America during the 60s. But he played with Levi Smith's Clefs. Now, that's an Adelaide-based band. That's Barry McCaskill. The other drummer from that band was John Freeman, okay, and he played with a band called Fraternity.
Oh, yeah, okay.
JF, as he's known, he's another one of the participants in my research. He's a very aggressive player, really good chops, great ears, musicality. You listen to Fraternity, the original stuff, I mean, a lot of people, think about the...
And I thought with the Fraternity stuff too, I had a good listen because I've never really listened to Fraternity, if you want to believe that or not. And I felt they were very kind of soft, and then you could hear where they started to become rocky in some of their songs, and they were changing from a 60s band to what I would call an early 70s band.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then you could hear his voice too, giving it that growl. And
he was,
yeah. There was a real change. Yeah.
Well, the song that I was thinking about was "The Shape I'm In" Spark for Fraternity,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is one of these, which is, it's got that eighth note syncopated bass drum that plays along with a bass guitar line. And now Bruce Howe was the bass player with John Freeman in that. Now Bruce Howe, John Freeman and Mal Eastick were the first Jimmy Barnes band. JF was in that band and then recorded all those parts and then got replaced.
Right.
And I had a conversation with JF about that too. But he's a very influential player. And those guys, Bruce Howe, they turned into a band here. Now, the interesting link with Fraternity is that Vince Lovegrove had a lot to do with Fraternity. He rang, when Bond was poached by AC/DC, he rang Glenn Christopher from Timepiece, right, who I was just talking about, to come down and audition for Fraternity.
Yeah.
Because they saw him, because Timepiece used to play a lot, Black Diamond used to play a lot with AC/DC when they were touring the East Coast, and Glenn was very good friends with that sort of core group of people.
Yeah.
So Vince went, great singer, come down to Adelaide and you can be the singer of Fraternity.
Yeah.
Glenn got here, and for lots of reasons in the rehearsal room, just it wasn't his thing. It was a bit too aggressive for him. He was a lot more trippy and mellow. He didn't join Fraternity. Uncle took over the vocals and that turned into Mickey Finn.
Right.
Now that band, Mickey Finn, listeners, if you haven't heard of them, they are probably one of Australia's greatest bands, rhythm and blues bands ever. They recorded at 301 in Sydney, their album, self-titled, Mickey Finn, and it's one of the all-time Australian fantastic albums. You know, if you haven't heard it, try and dig it up. It's really difficult to get because of politics, record label politics.
Is it up online?
No.
I didn't think so. I mean, I know I know of them well, but I've never seen it come up anywhere.
Yeah, see, you know, Maury Berg and guitar player. And another drummer I wanted to talk about was Joff Bateman from Headband, which is Peter Head. Now, a lot of people would have heard of Headband as well. Joff was a mighty player, very jazz-trained, also, but very progressive influence from Yes and King Crimson and Jethro Tull and all those amazing bands. You can hear all those influences in Headband. Now, Joff replaced John Freeman and Mickey Finn. Okay, so once again, this is this Adelaide community of drummers, but they toured Melbourne, Sydney, Queensland, like all of us did, and they're very influential players. But I think they're very underrated as well. But I'm talking about the influences. So we've kind of gone from early rock and roll, the rhythm and blues thing, which it turned into. Then we went psychedelic. Now we're getting a bit more aggressive when we're turning into the 70s, as you've noticed.
So what was psychedelic? 69, 70, 71?
Pretty much. I mean, Levi Smith's Cliffs are a great example of that. The Purple Hearts were turning into that. Buster Brown were just about to kick off.
Buster Brown was straight out rhythm and blues band.
They were, yeah. But if you have a listen to a couple of the earlier tracks on that album, on the Buster Brown album? Yeah, absolutely.
Really, I wouldn't have thought so. But that's my opinion. I wouldn't have thought so. I thought they're straight out Australian rhythm and blues pub rock with a 12 bar through there a lot of the way.
Yeah, that upbeat eighth note thing, quarter note thing that they sort of stress on the Buster Brown, the song Buster Brown. It's a dotted eighth note syncopated guitar line, which is really, really prog or psychedelic for that sort of period of time. And that's Phil Rudd, you know.
All I remember with that record, because I've played it about 10,000 times, is the quality of that recording for that time in this country. My God, so crystal clear. If you ever had a good listen, how crystal clear, and the drums in it are so well, whoever tracked those drums, right, did such a good job. I mean, it's just fantastic.
That was Lobby.
It was Lobby, he would have been producing, but I'm talking about tracking. Tracking's the engineer.
The engineer, who the engineer was of that record.
Exactly.
That would have been thing to find out. But,
I don't know if you had a good listen to and it struck me since the 70s, because I was a big fan, because I was a skinhead myself. The quality of the drums in there, forget it was Phil Rudd and the quality of the drummer, whether you think he's good or not. It was the recording of the drums. It was just so good.
Yeah, it was, absolutely. As I said, that's one of my all-time favourite albums that I just played to death. And I love Buster Brown because I love, one, it was powerful.
Yeah.
It was rocky. I mean, you know, the skinhead thing was Australia-wide, from Queensland to Western Australia, really. We had that whole movement over here. I played in bands that, you know, we did a lot of those shows for the rockers and the skins. And,
but when you talk psychedelic too, What comes to mind to me is Spectrum straight away.
Absolutely, yeah.
Psychedelic prog rock.
Yeah.
You know.
And that's Mark Kennedy.
Yeah.
Originally with that. See, that whole thing ties in once again, that Spectrum connection. It ties into the Pink Finks, which is Ross Wilson, Ross Hannaford, and then you tie that in with Mike Rudd. You know, you've still got that psychedelia, that prog influence. I'm really adverse to using the word progressive rock, but it's the only thing that sort of fits, and it's a modern term.
Yeah.
Because back then it was pretty much just music. It was bluesy, psychedelic, community music.
I find some people can explain it very clearly, prog rock. I find it fairly hard to explain because I see it just as rock because that was my period. So to me, it was just rock.
Me too. I was listening to Rick Beato did a thing on Rush's Greatest Song, talking about Neil Peart, as I mentioned earlier. Now, Xanadu blew my mind when I first saw that, and it was from the Exit Stage Left. Well, it was on Polaroid in concert, but it came out as a video in 82. It was the first time I saw Rush, so I was a little bit late coming to that party. But Xanadu is a classically arranged piece of music. It's incredibly technically difficult, but it's also wonderfully moving. As far as you get the whole picture of that they set up, and the lyrics are from a Samuel Taylor Coleridge poem. And the funny thing is, I'm reading Neil's last book that he wrote, and those lyrics are in that book, which is Clockwork Destiny or Clockwork Angels, the third book in the series that Neil wrote. And the way all that links up. But the prog term didn't exist, the point I'm trying to make without getting off track. The prog term didn't exist in the 70s, right? They then started to try and explain bands like Rush, and they labelled them progressive. They weren't. They were more classically structured, and they had that type of arrangement, sophisticated arrangements in the approach to their music. And then they were sort of labelled. They had to try, and journalists have to come up with a word to explain things to the general public. So I think that's where progressive rock came out, because you had the Genesis and you had Yes and King Crimson and Rush and, lots of amazing bands. But they were just Jethro Tull, really. They were just good players doing the 70s thing, which was...
So I'm going to pull it back. Where are we up to? We were up to psychedelic, right? So we're going past that period.
And then we got to Fraternity.
Yeah.
Right? And it started to chunk out and get bluesier and heavier guitar-wise.
Yeah.
Then from there, the next step is Graham Bidster from the Angels.
Right.
Where we start to get chunker. Now, the Angels are probably one of Australia's greatest acts.
Did Breck Eccles follow on from Brent? Sorry.
He did.
Did he follow on from that style, or did you think he had another style?
From Graham.
Yeah.
I've seen Brent a few times because we opened for the Angels a few times.
I know Brent, yeah.
He was technically probably more advanced. I mean, no disrespect to Buzz Bidstrup, because he's a very talented drummer, a very talented musician. But that was, Brent was the next level.
Bud went to Gangajang?
Yes.
Yeah, gotcha.
He did. I know, the Australian rock history, rock royalty, really. But the Angels had a thing that, Fraternity, AC/DC sort of came out of that in a way. So AC/DC are in there as well with that whole...
Well, who was the drummer in Stars, Adelaide band, and then moved on to Ross Wilson? Mondo Rock. Who was that?
Yeah, it's JJ Hackett. I was going to bring JJ up as well, because I knew JJ really well. And
right. Great drummer.
I was working at EMS Records in 76, and the first time I met JJ was he was doing a recording session at EMS Records with, I'm trying to think, Company Blue was Joff, David Ninnis was Mark Meyer. I met all these guys doing sessions when I was working at EMS, which is amazing because Mark Meyer's on that list as well. But wonderful Australian drummers too. But getting back to the Angels, right, and we've got AC/DC, and then we've got Dallas Royal from Rose Tattoo. Yeah. And that's the next progression on from Buster Brown. And you're starting to get heavier and heavier. So you can see AC/DC, Angels, Rose Tattoo, and taking it to the kind of the next level.
And even there, because you're then getting up to the late 70s, and then you're starting to talk Midnight Oil, aren't you?
Absolutely, Rob Hurst, yeah.
Right, and they were hard back then.
Yeah, they were. The Blue album, the first album, is just outrageously good.
Yeah.
It's my favourite Oils album because there's no leash on them.
I think for anybody to watch them is to see them on that harbour, when they did that island, Sydney Bribey Island show.
Oils on the water.
Yeah, that is just unbelievable.
It is, yeah. That's later down the track too, That's 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 era.
Yeah.
The Capitol Theatre gigs before that, when you can buy that DVD and it's the 2 gigs, it's the Capitol Theatre gig,
I don't
which
worry,
is the trip.
got it anyway. Got it because we put
the
it
Double
on
J
Night Moves.
anniversary.
Yeah, we put it on Night Moves at the time, so I had it from there.
Yeah, and they're on fire. But I knew there was a drumstick manufacturer in Sydney, Roland Jehan, and he made drumsticks for all these guys. And he made Rob's sticks, and he used to ring me up and tell me stories about Midnight Oil and Hesse from Crowded House and all that sort of stuff. So,
can I ask you, does anybody make any sticks in Australia anymore?
Yeah, there's a few independent guys, but it's very difficult.
Why is
getting
that?
Getting through the Australian music mafia.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Roland used to ring me because I used to sell his sticks in my shop.
Who, Roland Sticks?
Roland Jehan, who was Ozbeat Drumsticks.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, he used to get American hickory because that's what the best wood for drumsticks.
Yes.
And he used to get his supply from the United States. But all of a sudden, his supply got cut off.
Right.
Now, all the importers in Australia were putting pressure on manufacturers in America to not supply Australian manufacturers because it was cutting into their market because he was selling sticks for $8-10.
Right.
When sticks back then were $16 to $20, the American imports. And his quality was good. They lasted longer. He was very particular about it.
Because you and me are here to promote Australia. So that's why I'm asking, and I want to see who is manufacturing now and who we can support.
Well, I sort of lost touch with that because it broke my heart because Roland took his own life. So because of the pressures of not being able to keep up with the business and so on and so forth, and it was really sad to see a major Australian manufacturer just lose his mind because he couldn't get supply, he didn't get support from the industry. And it finished that. And his equipment, I don't know, went from somewhere, he was down south in just out of the Gong, I think, where he's manufacturing. And then, it all sort of stopped. But I know someone in Sydney did buy his gear, and I'm not sure whether they're still making sticks or not. I don't think they are. There's no one that...
Nobody makes sticks in Australia anymore?
No. Did you see the figures that came out with the budget on Australian manufacture is worse than it's ever been because imports are so high?
Well, I think that goes without question. And the death knell would have been 10 years ago when essentially we got rid of the car manufacturing industry. To me, that was it. That we're on a downhill spiral from there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
But the same with, like local manufacturers of instruments and things like that. They just don't get a leg in against the cheaper import.
That just surprises me, though, that nobody is making sticks in Australia. Now, there would be a real
I don't know whether that's true. I don't know whether
I'm going to look it up this week for next week's show. I'm going to look that up because it is a art form because the rebound and the flexibility in those sticks, that's just super important. Remember when they used to put rubber right down the centre?
But they were anti-vibe. That's what they were called because people were hurting their hands playing on hard electronic kits.
Right.
So in order to reduce the amount of impact that you were getting through your hands, they put rubber down the middle of the sticks, which absorbed, it's like a shock absorber inside the stick, but that's why they did that. But, the rubber kept on falling out and the stick split because they had a hole down the middle of it.
Right, yeah. I used, and I've still got carbon fibre sticks and I use those occasionally too.
Yeah, they were good. I mean, the thing is with sticks, if they don't break, something else is. It's either drum heads or cymbal.
Yeah.
So sticks are cheaper to replace than drum heads.
Absolutely.
And cheaper to replace than cymbal. But anyway, that's getting off the track. Which kind of, for me, that's about where I wanted to end up, was into the AC/DC, Angels, Buster Brown, and then mid-70s to early 80s. That's when everything sort of exploded around Australia with the corporate rock.
Well, look, I suppose, as I said to you, my take on the whole era is that I found the 60s, which I don't even understand, quite frankly. I'll be really frank with you. I don't get the music. I don't get the playing as much. And the drumming, because I'm a drummer, I suppose, I found quite intricate and you could never hear it that well because the recording was so terrible in the sense, well, Buster Brown was 73, wasn't it? 74.
Yeah, it was.
Buster Brown.
Yeah.
And so you got into the 70s and our recording methods got so good that you could actually hear it. But then you got this more 2-2-4-4 kind of thing happening. And, okay, there were some drummers that got outside of that, but there was that real pub rock thing happening, and that's where I really got into music. So that's what I understand. Then we get into the 80s and we had that electronic thing happening first. Everybody tried to get on the bandwagon. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, synths came out in the late 70s and by 80s, everything. Because the band that I played in 82, the Modes, I mean, that was very much synth pop style.
I got my first synth in, I think, 82, the Poly 800, called Poly 800.
And we had a mono Poly.
Oh, mate, fantastic piece of equipment. Gave it to my brother, who was playing with the band at the time, who destroyed it to pieces. I don't know, whatever happened to it. Anyway, then I had to get another one. But you had that 80s thing and that intricate thing where you maybe had a couple of electronic toms in your kit and they were expensive with your analog kit and, that experimentation.
Had an FDS7.
I don't know anything about them because I could never afford them. So they were never in the realms of what I could, test or play with. So it was never going to happen. But you had that experimentation happening, and then the 80s started to fold into the glam rock of the mid 80s with America, but at the same time you've still got the English rhythm and blues thing happening in their pub scene, and whether that be the Frankie Millers, Paul Rogers, all these guys happening. And so again, what you had was that Simon Kirke feel, and it was a very laid-back drumming style. It wasn't aggressive. Yes, you had Rush happening and you had Triumph happening and all those bands.
Yeah, one point with the 80s thing with electronic drums, I just want to give Virgin Soldiers a plug because on our single that we released with Do Junkies Paradise, and the good and the bad, I've got my Simmons SDS7 recorded in those sessions. So you can actually hear the tom fills and there's white noise and there's all that super bottom end. Because I did experiment with the electronic drums. Because, in excess, we're using them.
Yep.
He had the Pearl kit.
Yep.
Rob Hurst was using them.
Yep.
They're very sort of fashionable in the early to mid-80s. And
that nouveau love age that was there, 80 to 85.
And you've got the models in there as well.
Yeah, yep.
James Freud and all that synth pop was very, very popular going through that mid-80s sort of thing as well. You have to buy a hat off. I don't know a lot of the names of those drummers from those bands, but I played with them or worked with them a lot during the 80s and saw them and went and saw those bands a lot. They were amazing players, technically competent.
I think that bottom end feel of the 70s became that middle end feel of the 80s where you went from a 26-inch bass down, correct?
Well, I didn't know when up to a 26 from a 24. So.
Right. Well, I see. I found everybody was going down in the 80s. Everybody I knew.
I didn't get my 20-inch Sony kick drum, which I've still got, until 91 when everything was kind of that whole Dave Weckl, Vinnie Colaiuta, Steve Gadd, everyone was using the smaller funk-sized drums. That's when that influence really came in, and it was very, very popular over here. That jazz fusion thing was getting very popular over here in Australia as well. Well,
it's instead of that big thud that you were getting, and it was a bottom-end big thud, to that middle-order bass sound that was more it didn't resonate out so far. It was a lot narrower, I found.
Yeah, it was. I remember Chris Tabone, who played with the Bad Loves, but his band before the Bad Loves was a band called Major Minor with Nicky Bomber.
Oh, yeah, I remember that,
two great drummers in a fantastic band. Chris has had a Sonat, it was 20 by 24 or something. It was super deep.
Yeah.
And it blew your head off. It was like a cannon, but really tight and compact. It wasn't booming.
Well, I had a Pearl, mid-80s, I would have had the Pearl kit, or was it a Tama? No, I think it was a Pearl. And it had the fiberglass inside. Do you ever remember that?
Yeah, and there's a wood fiberglass.
Yeah, well, because it had the wood, and then you had at least 2 or 3 mil of fiberglass in there.
Yeah.
And then go on.
Neil Peart from Rush, once again, the percussion centre, I think, in Canada that used to look after his drums.
Yeah.
He used to get all his Tama drums vibrified, which was having that layer of fiberglass sprayed on the inside of the shells.
Yeah. Yeah.
to even out the tone. And Pearl had done that. I don't know who did that first, but Neil was doing that like from the mid-70s onwards. And I know
Right.
those Pearl wood fiberglass were around that time too.
Oh, mate, they were heavy to carry, and it gave
Yes,
you
yeah.
a real quick thud, and it didn't resonate out so far. So it narrowed it in to me even further with a more analog sound to it. I don't know how to explain it, but it was.
Yeah, it's more
unbelievable.
focused sound. It's
Yeah.
not as much, I don't want to use the word tone, but I will. It's not as much resonance in the drum. It focuses it and it keeps it tight,
Yeah,
which it's also, I think, is a characteristic
that's a
of
great way.
Pearl
Tight.
drums.
Yeah, tight. It was a really
It's a
tight
very
sound.
tight sound. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And everything did tighten up.
Yeah.
It went from the bottom boom,
Yeah.
into that really tight, compact sort of fusion-y sound as we went into the 90s.
Yeah. Well, that's that for today. Okay, so we're having a bit of a discussion there. What I want to finish off with today is, is there any more you wanted to add to that, Rob, or are you happy with that?
I think it's good to leave it there. I think,
Yeah.
we've got to the
Okay.
90s, so
All right.
we can progress on. And
Well, I think what news for today is I'm in a meeting all day Saturday, Laneway Red, and Laneway Red will potentially go live on Sunday. We have the 15th or the 30th of June slated as the potential release dates, but I think we'll be ready Saturday night, and we will do. Now, this will be a soft launch. It'll just go live, and I'm not even sure if Dan, my business partner, I'm not sure if Dan will put posts up on it yet, but we are going to leave it there for 90 days, testing for more bugs and to make sure we've really given it another shake up live. And then we will have a launch in 90 days. And we will have a launch party. And what I'm thinking of is that we will do it at a studio here. There's a fairly big studio and rehearsal rooms. And we will do probably a 2-hour launch, maybe 3, where we'll put on at least 3 or 4 of our bands, 20-minute sets, and launch Laneway Red. So
I could come over with Michael.
Yeah, well, mate, anything's but potentially there. So at the
We
time,
rehearsed last night.
yes. How did that all go?
Good, yeah. We've got 5 songs we were working on, new songs.
Yep.
They're done. And just we've got a gig coming up on July 13th. So yeah. No, that's good. Michael's really excited to
Well,
come into the fold.
yeah. Well, everybody knowing Michael. Now, what's Michael's second name?
Hill.
Michael Hill,
Like
who sings in a band with you,
Yes.
is joining Laneway Music. Hasn't joined yet, but he's going to join, and he will be releasing his solo material through us. Of course, you guys are rehearsing, so I presume your band may come across as that. Maybe
I could do that, yeah.
Yeah.
The guys
yeah. Talk about that.
that
So.
the thing to talk about, yeah.
And in
absolutely.
the interim, we have sent out an agreement, a contract for Susan, who goes under the name of Sorrel. Now, she's only got one song out, but she's got a pile of songs, and she's a lead guitarist and a bass player, and absolutely sensational because, I heard the material and I went, yes, I want you on Laneway Music. She's joining, so we will have some material from Sorrel coming out, which is really important because we as Laneway Music do not have enough female artists, and especially whether they are lead guitarists or whatever. That's just, to me, it's super important because we need more of them, and she's a great singer too. So there's all the ingredients there. So there's another artist there. There is a few other artists who we're in the process of signing. So there's a lot of new music coming, but we've got just a lot coming out. We've been swamped, so that it puts us under pressure. But I think the main thing at the moment is Laneway Red, because we are still very disappointed with results that we get across our campaigns that we run across socials, and that be YouTube or Facebook or whatever, Instagram or TikTok, which don't resonate. And I've said this a million times, do not resonate back to Spotify. So one of our artists yesterday said, look, how come I've got nearly 50,000 views on YouTube, I've got over 1,000 likes. So it's real. The bots aren't just there, right? So, someone has to click on the like, and I've only got less than 100 streams on Spotify. And I said, well, that's because the correlation, we don't know. The correlation doesn't work, and we don't know, is it YouTube or Google who don't really like people clicking on an external link and therefore restrict that somehow because then you're going off to Spotify and you're not on Google or YouTube anymore? Is that the same for Facebook? Because again, there we get some artists who have just got phenomenal 50 to 100,000 views, 500 likes, 100 or 200 shares, which are huge numbers. And then they go to Spotify and they've got, 50 streams. But there's a link in there, so you would think there'd be more than that. And there's no way of auditing any of this. So all those issues that come up have, made me think 2 years ago now when I came up with the idea for Laneway Red and put it to my partner, business partner, and then said, look, this is what I want to do. And then we've got another partner involved in programming, and that's a separate company, Laneway Red. And going through that process for near on 18 months of programming it. And that's because we are sick and tired of what's going on and the raw deal that musicians get or artists get, and there's no way of seeing what's real or what's not real. So we're very, very excited. We will pursue this for the next 12 months to build mass. It will be essentially there's streaming on it, there's streaming, but after 12 months, we then open it up to marketed streaming. So therefore, we will bring advertising in where then we are going to share with the artist on a 50-50 basis the marketing or the advertising that occurs on their songs. Now, you won't get that anywhere else. But then it comes down to how much is enough, and that refers to money, and that's why you get these Spotifys and Deezers and all these other companies, YouTubes. How much money is enough? How much you go to Spotify, and I think they had like 6,000 employees. Now they're retrenching half of those. And then you go to Dean Minst, who's running a kind of a third party type of online, I don't know if you want to buy high end bags and clothes and all that, turns over $1 billion, and he has 70 employees, and they are mostly all programmers. And that's what we do aspire to. Okay. I'm here for the artists. So I've got to be very careful not to go, people go, well, you're not going to employ a lot. No, our mantra is not to employ a lot, because if I employ a lot, then that's going to take away from what I can offer to the artist. So our big thing will be mostly programmers, then we'll have some marketers in there, and obviously finance. And finance just has to happen as a matter of course. But being a finance person background myself, you don't need to be overloaded with that, and you can automate a lot of that. So that's where we're coming from, and that's why we started it, and that's where we want to go to in the future. We do not want 5,000 or 10,000 employees. We want that money to go back to the artists. The site is very lo-fi. It's not all tricks and mirrors and looking fantastic and sparklers everywhere. It is a very straightforward site, but it is very powerful. Okay, there's downloads to start with, there's streaming, then you can sell equipment on there. Then later on, we have got it built in. Next year, we will bring ticketing on. There will be merchandising coming on, all this kind of stuff. So that's all coming. It's all built in there.
That's very exciting.
So, yeah, very much so. And hopefully next week when we talk, we can say it's out there, okay?
Yeah.
All right, mate. Well, let's go from there. It's been great talking to you today, and hopefully, our listeners have got something out of that little vision into drummers and going from, the 60s onwards and whatever. It's a fascinating period because to me, it did change so much from the 60s to the 70s. There was a big change in style, but equipment was a large part of that. Now, I don't mean the drums themselves, because when you actually look at the fittings and all that, I'm not sure they changed a lot in the 60s and 70s. They did after that. But the technique of recording and getting the sound from those drums was just skyrocketed.
It did, yeah. It's great. Recording technology.
All right, mate.
Improved a lot.
I shall talk to you soon.
All right, Vince. Will do, buddy.
See you, mate. Bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Well, there you have it, another Laneway Talks. If you enjoyed that, just search Laneway Talks for more great conversations.